The new VP muted me during a critical investor call to hide her failure, unaware that my silence was the trigger. The moment my mic died, a hidden contract clause activated, locking the entire corporation out of its own infrastructure and handing the keys directly to me. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious, where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The silence in my home office was louder than any screaming match I had ever endured on a factory floor. I sat there, staring at the digital graveyard that used to be my Outlook calendar. For 8 years, that grid had been a dense, colorful mosaic of logistics syncs, architectural reviews, and deployment stand-ups. It was the heartbeat of a company that shipped $20 million of merchandise every 30 days. Now, as I sipped a cup of lukewarm tea, the screen was a stark, terrifying white. It was the second week of January, and I had been erased. I refreshed the page, hoping it was a server glitch, a syncing error, anything other than the reality staring back at me. It wasn't a glitch. My weekly ops sync canceled until further notice. The shipping report review removed by the organizer. I checked Slack next, my fingers hovering over the keyboard with a tremor I tried to suppress. The channels where we coordinated site uptime, channels I had created, moderated, and lived in for nearly a decade, were archived. Gone. No warning, no memo. Just a digital eviction. I felt a physical sickness rise in my chest. A tightness that had nothing to do with the flu I was fighting and everything to do with the realization that I was being professionally dismantled. I messaged Chris, my lead developer, and one of the few people who actually understood the code underneath the floorboards. "You seeing this?" I typed. 3 dots danced on the screen for what felt like an eternity. Finally, his reply came through, a single baffling word: pods. My stomach dropped. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in the quiet room. Pods meant agile reorganization. It meant the structural hierarchy I had built to ensure safety and compliance was being shredded in favor of loose, ungoverned groups. I wasn't just losing meetings. I was losing the ability to stop a catastrophe. The betrayal wasn't just that they were pushing me out. It was that they were doing it by destroying the very safety nets I had spent my life weaving. The migraine started behind my left eye around noon, pulsing in rhythm with the ping of a new email notification. It was a summons, not a request, from HR. The subject line read, "Role alignment and agility." I took the call from my desk, my hand gripping the mouse so hard my knuckles turned white. Melissa from HR appeared on the screen. She was the type of corporate functionary who smiled with her mouth but never her eyes. I remembered her from the last round of layoffs. She was the one who handed out branded foam stress balls to the people clearing out their desks as if a squishy toy could pay a mortgage. "Nathan," she began, her voice dripping with practiced sweetness, "we've noticed some resistance in your communication regarding the new testing protocols. We're moving toward a model of high-velocity iteration." I asked why we were testing unstable builds in a live production environment. I said, my voice raspy but firm. "That's not resistance, Melissa. That's preventing a shipping disaster. If we break the routing dependencies, we lose entire subregions." She didn't blink, she didn't look at her notes. She just smiled that plastic smile. "We hear you, Nathan, but right now, leadership is asking everyone to be more emotionally agile. We need you to embrace the flow, not block it." Emotionally agile. I almost laughed. It would have been a bitter, ugly sound. What she meant was clear: shut up, sit down, and let the new VP wreck the car. She wanted me to applaud while they dismantled the engine. "I understand," I said, lying through my teeth. "Great, we knew you'd get on board," she chirped, ending the call before I could say another word. I stared at the black screen. They thought I was a dinosaur. They thought I was a barrier to their modernization. They saw a middle-aged engineer who was too rigid for their new vibe. But in their rush to push me into the corner, they had forgotten one crucial thing. They assumed I was just an employee. They didn't know about the paperwork I had filed years ago, back when the company was nothing but a warehouse and a prayer. I opened a secure folder on my local drive, not the company cloud, and clicked on a PDF titled Legacy Infrastructure Trust v4 PDF. I scrolled to page 37. Clause 141C. It was only a paragraph, innocuous and boring to the untrained eye, but as I read the words I had written 6 years ago, a cold calmness washed over me. They wanted to play games with authority. They had no idea they were playing in a sandbox I legally owned. To understand why I wrote that clause, you have to understand what I gave to this place. My name is Nathan. I'm 42 and I live in Elk Grove, California. For the past 8 years, I didn't just work here, I was the architect of the company's nervous system. I built the backend when we were shipping out of a garage. I wrote the automation frameworks that now handled millions of transactions. I was the one who woke up at 3:00 a.m. on Christmas morning 3 years ago to patch a server leak so that thousands of kids would get their gifts on time. Everything that moved in or out of our 3 massive distribution centers passed through logic gates I designed. I knew the pulse of the inventory windows, the staging latency, the data integrity models. I knew where the bodies were buried because I had dug the graves for the bugs myself. Then came Lacey Corian. She walked into the Tuesday morning ops meeting 2 months ago, and the atmosphere in the room instantly shifted from work to theater. I was already 2 cups of coffee deep, regretting showing up on time. The conference room smelled like desperate burnt coffee and fear. I sat in my usual spot, the back left corner, partially hidden behind a dead ficus plant that someone had forgotten to water after the Q1 layoffs. Lacey breezed in, fresh off some startup exit that probably involved an app for walking wealthy people's dogs. She didn't look like an operations VP. She looked like a Pinterest board come to life. She wore a cream turtleneck that cost more than my car and those oversized, thick-rimmed glasses people wear when they want to look intellectual without actually saying anything of substance. She didn't sit. She stood at the head of the table and clapped her hands together, beaming at us like we were a group of toddlers she was about to teach a nursery rhyme. "Okay, folks," she announced, her voice too loud for 8:00 a.m. "Let's reimagine fulfillment like it's a conversation, not a constraint." I blinked. I looked around the room. The other managers were staring at their notepads, terrified to make eye contact. She clicked a remote and a PowerPoint slide appeared on the wall. It was titled, "Operational Flow, a Journey, Not a Plan." "I want to talk about A/B testing our warehouse cadence," she said, pacing the room with manic energy. "We need to optimize our vibe feedback loops. We need to act like a music streaming service, not a dusty logistics chain." I raised my hand. I couldn't help it. "Lacey," I said, my voice cutting through the buzzwords. "We span 3 states, utilize 2 international ports, and operate under a union contract that is airtight. If you test fulfillment cycles mid-quarter without a rollback path, you aren't optimizing vibes. You're gambling with shipment accuracy. You'll break the routing dependencies." She stopped pacing. She turned to me, tilting her head as if I were speaking a dead language. She waved her hand dismissively, as if I were talking about the price of printer ink. "I hear you, Nathan," she said, her tone condescendingly sweet. "But we are prioritizing culture over control. Our systems are too rigid, we need flow. I want to decouple routing intelligence from the fulfillment nodes by the next sprint." That was the moment. That was the sentence that told me everything. You don't decouple intelligence from a logistics node unless you want the node to go brain-dead. She wasn't leading ops, she was gutting it to make it look pretty for a slide deck. She was an arsonist with a fancy title, and she had just walked into a paper warehouse holding a lit match. I decided right then that I was done being the voice of reason. If they wanted emotional agility, I would give them silence. But silence, as any engineer knows, is not the same as inaction. I stopped talking in meetings. I stopped replying to the frantic, confused emails from junior developers who had been thrown into the deep end without a life vest. Instead, I started working the night shift in my own home. Every evening after my official hours ended, I sat in the blue glow of my monitors, logging every deployment Lacey's agile pods pushed to production. I saved screenshots of dangerous code overrides. I copied system logs showing skipped safety checks. I exported weekly compliance diffs that proved we were drifting further and further from legal standards. She didn't know it, but every shortcut she took left a digital fingerprint, and I was collecting them all like evidence at a crime scene. My investigation wasn't just about watching the fire burn, it was about ensuring I had the extinguisher and the deed to the building when the time came. I pulled up the physical copy of the contract I had referenced earlier, the one containing Clause 141C. I needed to be absolutely certain. The clause stated, "If operational assets are reassigned or deprecated without formal technical sign-off from the designated authority, control of said assets reverts to the original architect until compliance restoration is certified." I was the designated authority. That wasn't just a title, it was hard-coded into the master administrative privileges of the system. I didn't trigger it yet, I just prepared. I pulled up the clause, verified the language against the current hosting agreement, and checked the archival timestamps. I even confirmed the original notarization with my trust Clear Hill systems. It was bulletproof. All she had to do was screw up once publicly in a way that formally removed my authority. Meanwhile, Lacey kept spinning her startup nonsense. She hosted a meeting with the product team and declared, fulfillment shouldn't be a bottleneck, it should be a shared experience. I muted that call and just stared at my screen. My systems weren't experiences. They were engineered fail-safes designed to keep billions in product moving across time zones. You don't vibe test freight lanes, but I let her believe she was winning. I let her walk right toward the edge of the cliff. 2 weeks later, the trap snapped shut. Lacey had scheduled a massive state of ops investor update call. This wasn't a standard stand-up. This was full executive visibility. We had the CEO, the CFO, outside board members, and even a compliance liaison from Boston on the line. I sat in my home office, wearing a tie for the first time in months. My primary monitor showed the Zoom grid, dozens of faces looking bored or expectant. My second monitor, however, was glowing red with backend alert pings that no one else could see yet. Lacey smiled into the camera, her background a blurred, tasteful office setting. She looked confident. "Thanks for joining, everyone," she began, her voice smooth. "We've successfully transitioned to a modular architecture across all fulfillment nodes. We have full compliance, full visibility, and early results show a 12% throughput gain quarter over quarter." That was a lie, a bold, quantifiable, dangerous lie. I looked at my data. Routing Module B was still running on legacy code, stuff I wrote 6 years ago. The timestamping system she claimed to have modernized hadn't been updated to sync with the newer queuing logic. Anyone who pulled a simple data audit would see the lag immediately. If the compliance liaison saw that, we would be fined into oblivion. I waited for a pause. I unmuted my microphone. "Sorry, quick correction," I said. My voice was calm, steady, contrasting sharply with her manic positivity. Lacey stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes flicked to the bottom corner of her screen where my name lit up. "The legacy routing module is still active," I stated, looking directly into the camera lens. "The timestamp sync is off by 3 hours because of the new pod updates. That creates a real risk. The reporting data you're showing won't match the actual fulfillment flow. That is not compliant." The silence on the call was absolute. The board members shifted in their seats. The compliance liaison looked up from his notes, suddenly interested. Lacey froze for just a second, her mask slipping to reveal pure panic. Then she turned, the fake smile stretching tight across her face like a rubber band about to snap. "Mute him," she ordered. It wasn't a request, it was a command to the call admin. There was a brief pause and then click. My microphone icon turned red with a slash through it. My audio cut out, they all saw it. No argument, no debate, no rebuttal, just erased. I didn't try to unmute, I didn't wave my arms. I simply reached into my desk drawer and grabbed a thick sealed envelope, the one I had notarized months ago. I held it up to the camera, right in the frame, for 3 full seconds, just long enough for the recording to capture it. Then I reached for my mouse and clicked Leave Meeting. The moment I logged out, the dominoes began to fall. My departure wasn't just a rage quit, it was the final key turn. Lacey's command to mute him had been recorded in the system logs as a forced removal of technical authority. Combined with the lack of technical sign-off on her recent changes, Clause 141C activated instantly. I sat back in my chair, watching my local console as it lit up in yellow, then orange. A background task, one I had coded to lie dormant until this exact scenario, kicked off automatically. It started tracking changes, shifting permissions, and revoking hooks. The backend code activated the minute that mute hit the logs. Everything Lacey had touched, routing configs, compliance keys, fulfillment nodes, started ghosting her access. She didn't know it yet. She was probably still on that call, smiling, bluffing through her charts, pretending that silencing the messenger had killed the message. But the control she thought she had was already gone. I had given her rope for 5 months, letting her wrap it around Uri's system in the company. All I had to do was wait for her to kick the stool. I didn't sleep that night. I rested in my chair, back straight, eyes flicking between 3 monitors and the soft hum of a backup drive spinning up under my desk. At 12:47 a.m., Nexus Flow flagged its first fatal error. The dependency tree broke. The routing intelligence software couldn't find 3 key modules because, according to the new permission set, they didn't exist for the company anymore. They belonged to Clear Hill Systems. By 2:00 a.m., live order data began rerouting to Distribution Center 6. The problem? DC6 had been demolished 9 months ago. It was a warehouse shell with no lights, no staff, and no loading dock. But Lacey's agile updates hadn't accounted for the hard-coded exclusion list I maintained. Without my keys, the system reverted to a default state from 2 years ago. By 3:22 a.m., the alerts turned a violent crimson. Order mismatch volume spiked through the roof. Refund triggers queued in 5-second loops draining the accounts. I watched it all in silence. The junior devs, the ones in the pods, tried to reroute traffic manually. I could see their frantic login attempts on my secondary screen. Access denied, authority revoked. They didn't have the keys, they didn't even know where the keys were. At 4:10 a.m., 3 different executives tagged me on Slack. Nate, are you seeing this? Systems aren't responding. Do you have override? I read the messages, I sipped my tea, I didn't reply. At 6:35 a.m., Lacey finally appeared in the internal ops channel. Her message was frantic, stripped of all buzzwords and vibe talk. Need Nathan to assist ASAP, we're escalating. She didn't mention muting me, she didn't mention the investor call, she acted like we were on the same team facing a natural disaster. But this wasn't nature. This was architecture. The dashboard, the one only I could see, was lit up like a forest fire. Her system was burning to the ground, and I let it burn. Because if you want culture over control, you better be ready to live in the chaos you created. At 8:03 a.m., legal finally started sniffing around. The first ping came from Mara, a mid-level counsel who was sharp and honestly way too good for this company. Her subject line was simple, urgent, routing failures/hosting contract inquiry. They weren't asking how to fix the broken code. They were asking who had the authority to touch it. By noon, finance flagged 4 major regulatory breaches in California, Missouri, and Delaware. Refund overflows had triggered consumer protection auto reports. Nexus Flow's audit log was a catastrophe. Someone in accounting tried to blame it on a bad deploy, but the tech chain was clean. There was no bad deploy, no rollback, and no access. The system wasn't failing because it was broken, it was failing because it was locked. By 1:30 p.m., Mara's tone changed. I got a follow-up email. Do you know anything about Clause 141C? I didn't answer. 5 minutes later, a different email thread popped up on my screen. This one had outside counsel CC'd and included 4 attachments. They had found the clause buried in the original hosting contract. Section 14, subsection 1C. It was highlighted in yellow, flagged with a big red comment that simply read, "Trigger condition met." It didn't take long from there. They ran a version comparison on the archived copy from 2 years ago and the notarized update I had filed 4 months back. The digital timestamps matched. The revision trail was clean. Third-party confirmation was verified by Clear Hill Systems, my trust. It was legal, it was binding, and it was live. Clause 141C. If operational assets are reassigned, deprecated, or modified without formal technical sign-off from the designated authority, full operational control reverts to that authority until technical compliance is restored. They saw the text and then they saw the logs. Lacey had pushed over a dozen structural changes to live systems without a single approval. She had removed routing modules, renamed audit layers, and rebranded fulfillment nodes to match some identity initiative she cooked up in a whiteboard session. No review, no sign-off. I had been the designated authority since 2019. She hadn't just tripped the wire, she had danced on it in high heels. But what sealed her fate was the call recording. They had the footage from the investor update, full screen share, system logs, and her voice clear as a bell saying, "Mute him." They timestamped the mute command. They matched it to the log entry where my authority was technically revoked. They matched that to the automated trigger in the backend system. I learned later that junior counsel confirmed it live on a panic call with the board. The mute action constitutes functional deauthorization. That is the condition. Mara apparently didn't say anything for a second. Then she asked about the envelope I had held up. Was that real? The intern, poor kid, sounded like he was fresh out of college. Yes, timestamp matches Clear Hill's notarization, it's already logged. That was when the panic went quiet. Legal realized the whole ops layer, the one they thought they had modernized, wasn't theirs anymore, it was under trust control. Mine, it wasn't a loophole and it wasn't a bug, it was a contract, signed, enforced, and triggered. Their systems were still running, but the keys were gone. Lacey lost it. I watched the recording of the emergency board meeting later. A sympathetic VP had screen captured the meltdown. Lacey was pacing out of frame, yelling about sabotage, waving her hands like someone had stolen her purse. "This is targeted," she screamed, her voice cracking. "He's doing this on purpose, he's retaliating, he's weaponizing the system." The general counsel didn't flinch. He sat there stone-faced looking at her through the webcam. "No," he said simply, "he followed the contract." Then he ended the call. She didn't come back after that. Later that afternoon, board meetings started happening without her. Private invites, no Lacey, no updates, just gaps on her calendar like someone had taken a black marker to the week. Then it hit Slack. A single message, no emoji, no spin. Lacey Corian suspended, pending formal review. 12 words, that's all, no defense, no thank you for your leadership. No PR spin, just suspended. She had built her whole image on being untouchable, connections, buzzwords, big ideas no one dared to question, but she forgot the basics. She forgot about ownership, she forgot who built the damn thing, and now she was locked out of it. I got the board's invitation that night. Subject, private consultation / board of directors request. Time, ASAP availability requested. I didn't reply right away, I made tea. I read through the logs again, clean, stable, no signs of outside tampering, just their own failures stacked up neatly. They were still scrambling, trying to figure out how to fix something they didn't understand. And me, I sat in my chair, quiet, still, and calm, because leverage doesn't shout, it waits. Mara called me at 7:06 a.m. sharp. She didn't open with small talk. Nathan, do you have a few minutes? Her voice was careful, thin, like she'd been up all night. I'm listening, I said. The board would like your assistance restoring systems access. We are prepared to discuss terms. There it was, the ask. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the empty street. I reached for my notepad. All right, I said, here is what I want. She didn't argue, she just listened, her pen scratching in the background. One full reinstatement of my original engineering team under direct contract. No pods, no reorg, their roles, their titles, their pay. Okay, she said. 2. Retroactive indemnity for all actions taken during this period, including my activation of Clause 141C, signed by corporate and the board. Understood. 3. Direct compliance access permanently tied to my trust. No interference. No filters. If systems break again, I am the first to see it. Reasonable. 4, I said, pausing just long enough for it to land. $1.7 million wired to Clear Hill Systems by close of business. I heard her blink, I didn't change my tones. It's not extortion, I added. It's a professional fee, I cleaned up someone else's mess. You want your systems back, you pay the janitor. She didn't push, give me a few minutes, she said and hung up. By early afternoon, the wire hit. They didn't push back. 2 minutes later, I confirmed the funds. Then and only then I typed the access key into my system. The backend shivered like something frozen coming back to life. Nodes reconnected, modules synced. Routing cleaned itself up in under 12 seconds. Fulfillment snapped back into shape like it had never broken. By 10:00 a.m., customer support queues were clearing, refund flags auto-corrected, compliance audits passed green. The panic ended fast. They called me again. This time it was Mara, the CFO, and a board rep. Your handling of this situation was extraordinary, one of them said. We'd like to offer you a position, Mara added. CTO, your title, your structure, 7% equity, executive support, full budget authority, and an assistant of your choice. I didn't laugh, I didn't yell, I just said no. There was silence, a long one. Finally, Mara asked, can I ask why? I answered without blinking. I wasn't an executive, I said. I was the foundation. I didn't need a title to prove it. I built the thing that kept this company breathing. And when you broke it, I was the one you called. That's enough for me. I hung up. I didn't take the job. I took the money. I kept my team employed and I kept my distance. Above my desk now hangs the envelope, flattened, framed, sealed, timestamp visible. Right under it, printed in black marker. It is a reminder. Next time, don't mute the person holding the keys.